Okay. What's up? I don't know when it was. A year or so ago. Something like that. I told everybody because I got a hot tip. I said, Nikon is finally weaning itself off the nipple of Sony sensors. The sensor inside the Nikon D850 is a TowerJazz sensor, an Israeli company partially owned by Panasonic who is doing foundry sensor production in a former Panasonic sensor foundry in, I forget the province in Japan. I got a lot of flack for that, and another rumor website said I was full of it because I said that it wasn't a Sony sensor in the D850, rather it was a TowerJazz, an Israeli-owned company. Of course, I'm right on that. Also, too, TowerJazz has put a press release out saying that we're moving according to our plans with the leading DSLR camera supplier. See, Canon makes their own sensor, so it's not Canon. It sure as hell is not Pentax. Sony, of course, is making their own sensors. It's not Fujifilm, of course. It is Nikon. Nikon has dumped an enormous amount of capital. By the way, the people that have said that this is going to be a stacked sensor, supposedly, a stacked sensor in the new mirrorless Nikon camera. People that said that TowerJazz was not making backside illuminated sensors are full of it, because I found it in the press release dated 2007 that TowerJazz was making backside illuminated sensors. 2007. So that's a lie. The sensor in the new breed of Nikon cameras is going to be TowerJazz. What percentage that is, I have no idea. I know that there was a report that TowerJazz is greatly expanding production and opening facility, and they're putting in, I forget how many billions of dollars into a foundry in China for sensor production. Sensors have a lot of uses. Actually, TowerJazz is an Israeli-owned company. Sensors are also used in the nose cones of heat-seeking missiles, by the way. Both the surface-to-surface and surface-to-ground. They stick those infrared, they're full-spectrum sensors, also for seeking out aircraft and, like I said, seeking out other targets. Sensors have a lot of uses. They're not just for so that's Israeli military industries, and I forget not just TowerJazz. Anyway, Israel needs those sensors for. I find that sort of stuff interesting because people don't realize that sensors have lots of uses. They're used for industrial, but they're also have a lot of really hardcore uses for military hardware. But anyway, yeah, they're made in, I forget which prefecture or province in Japan, but they're former Panasonic plants. So essentially, even though it's now owned by TowerJazz, but TowerJazz owns part of Panasonic, and Panasonic owns part of TowerJazz, I assume for some sort of tax reason, that essentially what is in the Nikon D850 is essentially a Panasonic sensor. And so it appears that nobody knows how much Nikon has invested into a very, very close hookup with TowerJazz, but that future sensors and Nikons are going to be TowerJazz sensors, and you know, that doesn't bode well for Sony. They're going to lose a huge market share. Canon's making their own, and Canon just recently announced that they're going to expand and improve their sensor foundry to backside illuminated, and also some incredible high dynamic range sensor they were recently boasting about. No, it's an incredibly high megapixel sensor, but that was that's another reason high megapixel sensors are used, not for cameras, but for surveillance equipment. So you could actually zoom in digitally. You don't actually need optical zooming. So you could just point a really high megapixel sensor at a certain area with a fixed focus length lens, and you're able to zoom in digitally and have incredible security. And so it seems that Canon is going for that, and they're going to dominate the market for security sensor technology with their foundry. So I don't know who Sony's going to be selling to now. Obviously to their own, and who knows to what degree Fujifilm. But Nikon is giving the middle finger to Sony, whether wholly or partially, I don't know, but certainly to a great extent, because the press release from TowerJazz specifically is in reference to, although not using the word Nikon, in reference to Nikon, with the leading DSLR camera supplier. Well, it is Nikon, because it's not Canon. It sure as hell isn't Sony, and it sure as hell isn't Fuji, and it sure as hell isn't Pentax. It's Nikon. And Nikon probably wanted to keep them, have them keep that hush-hush. But they still wanted to brag about it by referring to the leading DSLR camera supplier. Well, that's Nikon. This will continue to position us as a leading foundry for high-end photography applications. All these exciting activities will bear fruit in the coming 2 to 3 years in a steady, high-volume, high-margin production as the world's leading provider of CMOS sensor for high-end applications. And yes, I was the first person to report that the sensor in the D850 was TowerJazz. And I got a lot of flack for it in the months afterwards, but I was right. So I knew it wasn't Sony either, because it actually had completely different characteristics and properties of output on the D850 than what is typically found on a Sony. It reminded me of a Panasonic sensor, which is exactly what it is, basically. It's a Panasonic sensor. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good weekend. And, yeah. Bye.